That's a pig.
Okay. So tonight's lesson will be on gluttony. It's not a word that we hear used in public very much. It's an older word. So I'm going to define it for you. It comes from the Latin word gluttare, and it means to gulp down or swallow. That's its basic meaning. Of course, it has the other meanings that we are used to of overindulgence, overconsumption of food, drink, or intoxicants to the point of waste. That is the English definition of gluttony. What is our society's view of gluttony and food in general? What do you think?
That gluttony doesn't exist.
Kathy says that gluttony doesn't exist. I'm not sure about that, but okay.
Well, I mean, in the most part, I mean, you go to restaurants and you don't get like a normal sized portions. I mean, even in restaurants, it's like bigger is better, and you get massive plates like with mounding peels of food. And not only that, you get like 3 courses, and then you get people that I hear of in Haiti that have a granola bar for a week.
Right, right.
I want more. I want more. I want more.
Okay. So that's our view. Okay. What about food in general? How does the American society feel about food? Kathy says too expensive.
At least that's what everybody at the stores complain when they're shopping.
Yeah.
Okay, so yeah, it's becoming more expensive, but we have shelf after shelf and variety after variety. And if you go to other countries, you don't see that.
Nope.
And most Americans don't even realize that we have this bounty that we do. We get upset if our favorite thing is no longer on the shelves because the COVID supply chain screwed it up, right?
Mm-hmm.
So this is nothing new to societies. St. Thomas Aquinas, a famous theologian, in his Summa Theologica, had 5 ways that he considered that people of his day committed gluttony. The first was eating food that is too luxurious, exotic, or costly. Second was eating food that's excessive in quantity. 3, eating food that is too daintily or elaborately prepared. 4th, eating too soon or at an inappropriate time. And 5th, eating too eagerly.
Mm-hmm.
What do you think about that? Does that sound like today's society? A little bit.
Oh yeah.
Oh yeah, yeah. And this, you got to remember, this was a really long time ago, centuries ago, that he wrote that. So what about the Bible? Does food appear in the Bible?
A lot.
A lot. Okay. Well, let's look at a couple verses that talk about the word gluttony. They may not actually say the word, but the idea of gluttony is in these verses. So somebody want to look up Philippians 3:18-19. And then
Got it.
the next one is Proverbs 23:1-2 and 20-21.
I'm sorry. Proverbs
23 verses 1 and 2 and verses 20 and 21.
Okay. I could do Proverbs 23.
And the final one is Proverbs 28:7. All right. So whoever has Philippians, go ahead and read it.
For many walk, of whom I often told you, and now tell you even weeping, that they are enemies of the cross of Christ, whose end is destruction, whose God is their appetite, and whose glory is in their shame, who set their minds on earthly things.
Okay. Their destiny is destruction. Their God is their appetite, or other translations say their stomach. Oh, we got Clarissa.
Yay.
All right. So the next one is Proverbs 23:1-2 and 20-21.
Okay. When you sit to dine with the ruler, note well what is before you, then put your knife to your throat if you are given to gluttony. Do not crave his delicacies, for that food is deceptive.
Drop down
do
to
not
20 and 21.
do not join those who drink too much wine or gorge themselves on meat, for drunkards and gluttons become poor, and drowsiness clothes them in rags.
Okay, so the Bible's pretty strong about gluttony in Proverbs, isn't it?
Yes.
You know, if you're given to gluttony, stop yourself at all costs is basically what it says. And don't get together with people that drink too much wine or gorge themselves on meat, because those people are going to become poor and they're going to be clothed in rags.
And that was Proverbs what?
23, 1 to 3, actually, and 20 and 21 of the same chapter. We have one more Proverbs, 28:7. So whoever has that, go ahead and read it.
28:7.
Mhm.
You got it.
A discerning son heeds instruction, but a companion of gluttons disgraces his father.
Okay. So those are words from the Bible about gluttony, but food appears throughout the Bible. In fact, the Bible begins and ends with food, right? Think about it. In the beginning, in Genesis, we have the forbidden fruit of Eden.
Mhm.
And in Revelation, we have the sumptuous wedding banquet of the Lamb. And so, because food is throughout the Bible, and this is not the only places, and we'll talk about some other places food appears in the Bible, we need to think about this statement. What we do with food is a clear reflection of our relationship to God. Where do you think that comes from?
I don't understand it, so I don't know.
Okay, then we need to dig into it further. So in Genesis chapter 1, God says, "See, I have given you every plant yielding seed that is upon the face of all the earth, and every tree with seed in its fruit, and you shall have them for food, and to every beast of the earth, and to every bird of the air, and to everything that creeps on the ground, everything that has breath of life, I have given every green plant for food." And it was so. God saw everything that he had made, and indeed it was very good. Then skipping to chapter 2 of Genesis, then the Lord God formed a man from the dust of the ground and breathed into his nostrils the breath of life. And the man became a living being, and the Lord planted a garden in Eden in the east, and there he put the man whom he had formed. Out of the ground the Lord made to grow every tree that is pleasant to the sight and good for food. So in the beginning, God created both the human being and the things that he gave us to eat from dirt. And the difference between what we're given to eat and ourselves is that God breathed the breath of life into us, so that we could become creatures that have relationship with him. And the word behind God breathed into the nostrils and we became a living being, the word for living being there is a very interesting word. It's nephesh. Nephesh, nephesh. And it's the root word of this word, nephesh, is throat. And a throat, of course, we know is a passageway from outside of our body to our inside. And it's the passageway through which all that sustains us goes. the food, the water, and the air that we all need to survive. It all comes through the throat. And God says when he breathed into our nostrils, we became living throats. Living, walking throats. And that throat is supposed to remind us of our emptiness inside and our need to be fed, our need to receive continually, because we can't retain the food or the water or the air. We need to have it constantly replenished. So we are this open throat that is needy, and God is the one who takes the initiative to fill our emptiness, to provide what we need. So in the very act of creation, he made us as needy beings that needed relationship with him and needed him to provide for us. So what we take in through our throat needs to remind us of our neediness for God, our dependence upon him. And therefore it is a reflection, how we treat those things is a reflection of our relationship with him. Because look, when the relationship went bad, what did they do?
Eat.
They said, I don't want to be dependent anymore. I want to be independent. I want to be like God. I want to know good and evil. I want to live forever. I want to not have to depend on God. I want to be like God. And it messed up the relationship that they had with God. Does that make more sense now?
I understand the throat thing.
Okay. We understand that. Can you picture us big, empty, big throats walking around?
Yeah.
Okay. It's not the only time that we see a relationship between God and people that involves food. What other specific things throughout the Bible are instances when our relationship with God is in some way being tested, and food is part of the test? Let me think of
Fasting.
stories. Fasting. Okay. Yeah. What else? Old Testament. 40 years.
No. There's that thing.
The manna and
Yep. The
and
wilderness,
the
right?
yep.
Yep. And so they had to learn, the people of Israel that were slaves and that had things given to them, even though it wasn't perfect life, they had what they needed given to them, and they had lost their dependence upon God. And so wandering in the desert, they had to relearn dependence upon God, and they messed it up many, many times because they said, I'm thirsty. I want to go back to Egypt. Why did you bring us out here to die? And all of this stuff. But God, over and over again, he gave him manna that rained down from heaven, the very food of heaven. He gave him water out of rocks. He gave him quail that just flew into their camp, and all they had to do was catch them for meat. They had to relearn their dependence on God. How about the prophet Elijah? Who fed him? It was in the middle of a drought, and people were out to try to kill him. Who fed him?
The birds.
The
Right?
birds. The birds fed him. God provided ravens to bring him food. What about Jesus? He had 4,000 and 5,000 people sitting around listening to him without food. Where'd the food come from?
The boy, right? There was a boy.
Yeah.
That one.
There was very small kids' lunch that Jesus multiplied to feed everybody. Yeah. But again, Jesus being God, he provided the food. And we're even in communion, we're reminded of this food God relationship thing. We are to, as if we are taking Jesus' body and his blood in remembrance of his sacrifice for us. It's a taking into our nefesh, into our throat, or into our emptiness, a reminder of what God has done for us, his provision for us. So food is the provision of God, a gift of divine origin. Do you stop and think about food in that way ever when you go to eat?
No,
When we're ready to eat, what are we thinking?
I'm hungry.
I'm
That
hungry.
smells good.
That smells good. We're thinking about the things we're going to taste.
Does that have carbs in it?
Okay, does it have carbs in it? If you're watching your carbs, yeah. Okay. What else are we thinking? What happens when you sit down to the dinner table? What all kinds of stuff is going on when you're sitting down at the dinner table?
Well, in my house, the kids are crazy.
Okay. And why are they crazy?
Is that a real question?
Hmm Why were they crazy around dinner time particularly?
Oh, usually because they're hungry and then my kids they fight over their seats and I want to sit here and this one touched me and they breathed on my food and all kinds of things.
Hmm hmm
I'm not looking forward to those days.
Oh,
And we're thinking, who's going to say the blessing and how fast are they going to get it said?
because the food smells good and I want to eat it while it's hot.
And mom's thinking, the food is getting cold. Come on, guys, let's settle down. Let's eat.
Yep.
And, maybe the kids are thinking, how fast can I get back to my electronic devices?
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, we do not think of food in the way we should. And the reality is that we should treat food like a sacrament of dependence on God. Sin came because man wanted to be independent, to be the feeder and not the fed.
Can you say what you did about the sacraments? We should treat food like what?
Eating is a sacrament of dependence on God. Sacraments are things like baptism and communion and marriage. Those are sacraments. Those are special times when we specifically remember God in a specific way, and usually our relationship with God. But we have lost our understanding of what food is and what relationship it plays to God, and that's where we need to get back to. That's the attitude we need to have towards food.
I guess like if it was harder to get the food, like if it's like in a different country or something, you would have more like appreciation for how
Mhm.
you're provided every day.
Mm-hmm.
And because we don't have a like a difficulty getting food here, it doesn't even cross our mind most of the time.
Right. And that's why we fall into the trap of gluttony. And we will go on to talk more about the biblical concept of gluttony.
It's not even just it's the time frame, because even in some third world countries, they're called third world countries, but yet there's a different imagery that you get when you've gone to one that's called a third world country. And so it's like it's a time thing for me, because back in Little House on the Prairie time, you had to go out and farm and do, and now in this day and age, it's all done for you, and everything is about how can I get it fast, easy, and there's no time that's taken to really understand where it comes from.
Right. And some people even have it just delivered straight to their door. They don't even have to go hunt and bag it at the grocery store. Yeah. So to be fully human is to accept our neediness and our hunger as a reminder that we are creatures and not creator. that we're meant to live in relationship with the one who feeds us, that we need to relearn this dependency thing. And as with all of these 7 sins, it's about our attitude toward these things. And our attitude towards food has gotten corrupted by our world and the view that we have of it and how easy it is to obtain and all of this, that we forget that it all comes from God. We forget that we're dependent upon him. And yes, fasting is one way to remind ourselves of that, in the sense that we often never feel truly hungry or feel a need. And if we couple that with prayer and with Bible reading and focus on God, we are reminded of our dependency for him. But food is on every page in Exodus. If you're reading through Exodus with the church group, you'll find food in every page. And Jesus talked about food a lot too. Let me read a little bit about that. When we come to the New Testament, we find the same thing. Food's on every page, or central to Jesus' story. He's all about food. He tells parables about feasts and banquets and dinner guests. He takes bread and blesses it and feeds crowds. He blesses those who hunger and thirst after righteousness. He says, "My food is to do the will of him who sent me." That's John 4:34. He teaches us to pray for daily bread. He's accused of eating good food with bad people when he eats with tax collectors and sinners. They even call him a glutton and a drunkard. His last meal with his followers is a Passover Seder. And on the cross, he says, "I thirst." Following the resurrection, he reveals himself at a meal to the 2 from the road to Emmaus. They recognize him in the breaking of bread. When he meets with startled disciples in a closed room, the first thing he asks for is something to eat. Later, he invites his disciples to a fishing party on a beach for breakfast. Food is a biblical topic, which now brings us to the idea of gluttony. This is a sin that is almost never preached about, rarely talked about. And so most of us have no idea what it is. Have you ever heard a sermon on gluttony?
No.
Okay. So most people think that its close relative is going to be obesity, right? That's what comes to mind in our country, but it's not. Obesity has many causes: heredity, chemical imbalances, medications, diseases, metabolic rates, set points of our bodies, genetic factors, psychological issues. There's a lot of causes for being, if we want to call it that, overweight. But how big we are and gluttony don't go hand in hand. You can be skinny as a rail and still be a glutton. Gluttony is about our attitudes toward food, the practice of eating in certain ways, and the habits that we associate with food. So what are the wrong associations, attitudes about food that become gluttony? Here are the 3. Eating to fill an emptiness that cannot be satisfied by food. So we sense an emptiness in ourselves, and food is our addiction, our thing that we're trying to fill that emptiness with. Second one, eating as an exercise of power. And we'll describe that a little bit more in a minute. It's something that we feel we have control over and power over, and so we want to exert that power to feel good about being in control of something. And the third one, eating as a signal of bad theology. So with gluttony, food is our salvation and our comfort. Food is more important than people. Food is an individual fixation. Food turns us exclusively inward. When we're thinking too much about the food and not about the feeder, God, the creator, we turn inward. Food numbs our emotions. Food gives us a false sense of power. Food is consumed, not enjoyed. Food diverts us from the life issues that need to be faced. We use it as a comfort. You ever heard somebody talk about comfort food? So what's your comfort food?
It depends on why I need to be comforted.
All right. So what are some of them? What's your comfort food?
I like chocolate,
Okay.
but I also like sometimes warm drinks,
Okay.
like teas and hot chocolates.
Oh, the chocolate theme in there. Okay.
But sometimes I also like nachos.
Okay. Anybody else? Comfort food.
It's called comfort food, but I just make it because it tastes good. I don't know that I'm really using it to comfort anything, but my mac and cheese.
Okay. And sometimes comfort foods are something that we remember from that somebody made for us in the past that we associate with a person. Okay. Comfort food. Tanuja, you have something you want to add?
Chocolate and ice cream.
Chocolate and ice cream. Okay. Clarissa,
Tuna.
Sarah? Got any comfort foods, guys? Clarissa or Sarah?
Just food in general, if I'm hungry. I'm not a
Okay.
very big meal eater, but I could sit down and eat a whole jar of pickles or Oreos. So
That's what I was gonna say. I was gonna say you like your Oreos.
I say that story because Lisa was the one sitting next to me. So yeah, cookies are my comfort food, I guess.
Mhm.
Chocolate, baked goods.
Yes,
All right.
chocolate.
You hear me?
My daughter, yeah, we heard you.
Yes.
My daughter's
Sorry.
comfort food is mac cheese.
You can't go wrong with mac and cheese.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. There are some foods that I associate with my mom. For example, when I was away at college and she would ask when I was coming home, what do you want for dinner? What do you want me to make special for you for dinner? And I would often ask for her meatloaf, a baked potato, and green beans. Or sometimes I'd ask her to make her homemade noodles with a pot of boiled chicken, chicken and noodles. But yeah, there are things that you associate with people sometimes. So let's go back to the three problem things. Eating to fill an emptiness. We feel isolated, lonely, troubled, or anxious, and we have this empty feeling that's not going away. And so instead of turning to God to fill the emptiness or deal with the situation, we stuff our mouths and our throats, our nefesh, with food. And we eat until our brain releases mood-altering serotonin. It's one of our hormones. And it numbs us like an emotional anesthetic. So we are self-medicating with comfort food, or we're just food in general, to try to fill that emptiness in us. Other people might try to fill it with sports or novels or pornography or video games or work, or it could be anything. But that's one way we can fall into gluttony. And it's usually done alone. And we usually are separating ourselves from the very people that can help us through their friendship and listening ears to deal with whatever it is that's causing the emptiness. So eating to fill an emptiness that can't be filled with food. That's the first one. Second one, eating as an exercise of power. How often do you feel powerless or out of control?
Every day, all day, some days.
Mm-hmm.
in the world that we live in, and on top of your own stuff going on
Mm-hmm.
since COVID and since my breast cancer, I've become a very much more of a recluse.
Mm-hmm.
My anxiety has gotten super, super bad,
Mm-hmm.
but it's getting, we're getting a lot better. So praise
Okay.
God.
Well, when we feel out of control, we want to do something that makes us feel in control. For some people, that's compulsive cleaning. Some people, it's compulsive eating. It can be a lot of things, but when we treat food as a way to help us feel in control, we've got the wrong attitude. Granted, the world's a tough place, and we find ourselves powerless to change a lot of things. But when we're offended, hurt, or angry, we turn to something that we can control and we start controlling it. And one thing that we can control, nobody's going to prevent us unless we're a kid, or deny us from getting whatever food we have a desire for, if we can afford it or find it some way. We do that because it's a way of controlling. It's one of the few things that we can do when we want and how we want. So it might be spoonfuls of ice cream into our mouths. It could be whatever thing that makes us feel we're in control. We want it, and so we take it, and we eat it. And like I said, there's a lot of other things that we will treat in the same way. Having a desire to feel in control and using some situation to make us feel like we are in control. The third one is eating as a signal of bad theology. Sometimes we were taught wrong things about food, and it shows up in our eating. We grew up as consumers whose highest goal was to consume all that we wanted, to have all that we can get without any regard for others. We're a consumer society. We are to live the American dream, right? That's the ideal. And because we grew up that way, and the idea of the one who has the most wins and all of that, we never learned better. So we got wrong theology, and we are consumers instead of realizing that we are dependent on God. We're all about the having and the consuming. So could it be that at the core of our relationship with God, food has assumed a role that it was never meant to have? What do you think?
What do I think about food assuming a role it was never meant to have?
Mm-hmm.
I think that that's true.
Okay.
Very, very true.
All right. And isn't it ironic that the very same culture that's all about consumerism demands that women in particular have the thinnest waist, and also they want large breasts too, right? So that's all about food too, isn't it?
Thinnest waist, biggest butt, largest hips, Barbie body that does not exist.
That's
That's
right.
right. So you've got the juxtaposition of being super thin, so denying yourself food, but also having all the characteristics of a good mother to be able to bear children and feed the children, right? So it's all wrapped up in there. But women have higher fat to muscle ratio than men. It's easier for us to gain weight than it is for us to lose it. And all of that wraps up together. And it's also brought on this whole idea that we hate our bodies. We don't like the way we look. And again, food has become an issue. Compulsive dieting is also a problem because it's bowing to the idol of thinness. You ever think of it that way?
So anorexia is basically a form of gluttony.
Yes, it's a wrong attitude towards food again. And gluttony, the whole idea of sin of gluttony is the wrong attitude about food.
That's true.
And women will do anything to bow to this god of thinness. What are some of the weirdest things you've heard people do?
Well,
I
it's not.
watch way too much plastic surgery shows to tell you.
Okay, so
I was just gonna say the
cut it
same
off to
thing.
fix it. Cut it off to fix it, okay?
Yeah.
And that's been becoming something that some kids in junior high school are willing to go for, right?
I was
They're willing to have
actually
that surgery. Yeah.
in the beginning before keto and before and I had lost weight multiple times, like 70, 50 pounds, like a decent amount of weight, but I would gain it back. And Peter had made a deal with me because I thought I wanted to get my breasts done because the losing of weight and all of that just made them not so pretty anymore. And and it was really funny because keto, it's not like that. It's not the same as it was with keto, as it was with the other, losing of weight. And it become like I don't want to cut any of it off. I did this to my body. You know what I mean? Like God gave all of this to me, and then the horrors of putting something in my body and it, affecting me negatively, and COVID vaccines definitely helped me with that. but I got, it was cool because God brought me through keto to being comfortable and happy with my body. Like I like my body. I don't think I like every part of it. I don't want to remove any of it, even though it's not the ideal. Does that make any sense?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. We're often never satisfied, right? If we have curly hair, we want straight hair. If we have straight hair, we want curly hair. And the list goes on. So the god of thinness turns a person into a self-centered, self-loathing, showcasing, lonely, empty shell of a person. And we don't want to bow to this thin god. It's time for the followers of Christ to cut down these idols, these thin gods. And there's a checklist here. Think about these things as I read them. If you find yourself falling into any of these traps, ask yourself, am I bowing to the thin god? Here are the symptoms. My worth is rooted in how I look. My energy is given primarily to looking better. I eat alone and rarely converse around a dinner table. I skip meals. I make meal choices based on the food rather than on the relationships, who I'm going to eat with or where the food comes from. I either hate my body or I'm overly proud of it. I judge obese people to be failures in life. I believe I can climb the social ladder if I just drop a few pounds. I play thinner than thou games with friends. I believe my life would be richer if I lost 10 pounds.
30 pounds.
Bigger goal. Okay. So, gluttony and compulsive dieting are both failures to recognize proper relationship between God and food. Jesus has the final word on food. He came to a needy humanity, and he wants us to remember that we're dependent on God for that food. We're supposed to ask, as he taught us in his prayer, daily for what we have need of in terms of food. So let's read Luke 12:22-31. Jesus talking to us about food.
You said Luke 12?
No, Luke. Yeah. Luke 12:22-31.
22 to 31.
Yeah, long passage. Sorry.
Boy, Mel. Then Jesus said to his disciples, "Therefore I tell you, do not worry about your life, what you will eat, or about your body, what you will wear. For life is more than food, and the body is more than clothes. Consider the ravens. They do not sow or reap, they have no storeroom or barn, yet God feeds them. And how much more valuable you are than birds. Who of you, by worrying, can add a single hour to your life? Since you cannot do this very little thing, why worry about the rest? Excuse me. Consider how the wildflowers grow. They, they do not labor or spin. Yet I tell you, not even Solomon in all his splendor was dressed like one of these. If that is how God clothes the grass of the field, which is here today and gone tomorrow, is thrown into the fire, how much more will he clothe you, you of little faith? And do not set in your heart what you will eat or drink. Do not worry about it, for the pagan world runs after all such things, and your Father knows that you need them. But seek his kingdom, and these things will be given to you as well."
Okay. So what does he say about food?
Don't worry about it,
Don't worry about it. Why?
because he'll take care of us.
Because he's got it in his hand. What else?
You're
He's the
muted.
bread of life. He's the bread of
he's the
life.
bread of
So,
life.
so therefore, we don't need to worry where our food's going to come from because God will provide it no matter what.
Mhm. And life is more than eating and drinking. Mhm. Okay. Jesus knew that food was more than being filled in a physical sense with food. He knew that doing the will of his Father was his food, for example. So how can we celebrate food as a good gift from God without letting it become our God?
I think it's important to know why you're consuming the food.
Okay. Jesus told us to practice two things that would help us keep the right perspective on food. Any idea what those two things might be? Guesses?
Ellie, what was the question again? I'm sorry, you're coming in and
Jesus,
out.
Jesus told us to practice two things that would keep a right perspective about food. What do you think those two things were?
Fasting and praying.
Fasting's one of them.
I don't know, but
Thank
patience is coming to my mind. I don't know why.
What was that, Clarissa?
Patience is coming to mind for some reason. I don't know why.
I still didn't catch what you said.
patience.
Patience. Oh, okay. Oh, and we lost her. No, not patience.
Thanksgiving.
Okay, sort of related to that. Feasting. We feast at Thanksgiving, right? So fasting and feasting are the two practices that Jesus gives us to help us keep right perspectives about food. I'll let her get back in. Okay. So the other one, Clarissa, was feasting. So fasting, Jesus intentionally asks us to experience hunger without satisfying ourselves, to remember that our physical hunger is a reminder of our spiritual need, our relationship need, our dependence need on him. Fasting reminds us we need God, and that we are dependent on him, not on our humanity. Fasting heightens our sensitivity to God. We're no longer numbing ourselves. Helps us to feel what the world around us feels, that empty gut, and especially third world. But don't confuse fasting with dieting. They're not the same. Here's the contradictions here. Dieting is about willpower over food. Fasting is about relinquishing of our power to God. Dieting is about human control. Fasting is about human submission to God. We're submitting to what he told us to do. Dieting is about what I eat. Fasting is about who I am and my relationship with God. Dieting is about losing weight. Fasting is about becoming Christ-like. Dieting is about impressing people. Fasting is about serving people. Dieting is about shrinking my body. Fasting is about surrendering anxiety over food and turning over our life to God, our body to God.
But what if dieting is for health reasons for some people? Is that
Nothing
different?
wrong with that. That's not having a wrong attitude about it. That's doing what you need to do. God says we're supposed to take care of the temple that he lives in, and that's our bodies. Jesus practiced fasting, but always in association with prayer and directing his attention towards his Father, God. Jesus also practiced feasting. Feasting is when you eat with others and have relationship with them. That's what feasting is. So being a dinner guest or being a dinner host. Feasting is about relationship again. It's about welcoming others, making them feel worthy of your attention. And it also reminds us of communion that we celebrate on Sundays. We feast together. And it reminds us, all of that reminds us of the feast of the bride, which is the church with Christ in the end times. The Eucharist of heaven, a feast of grace and mercy, of plenty for everyone. Everyone equal at God's table, never needing to eat physical food again. So feasting and fasting. But the most important thing to remember about food is it is an attitude situation, as all of these are. And if we go back to our statement at the beginning, let me find it. We've got it written down here. Eating is a sacrament of dependence on God. So when you sit down at the table and you pray your blessing over your food, you might want to ask God to remind you of your dependence on him. And part of the blessing is to thank him for providing the food for us and allowing it to nourish us. And so it's an attitude about food. Not wanting too much, not wanting too little. It's all about an attitude. All right, and I'm going to end the recording there.